Frog and Toad Are Friends by Arnold Lobel. Frog ran up the path to Toad's house. He knocked on the front door. There was no answer. "Toad! Toad!" shouted Frog. "Wake up! It is spring!" "Blah!" said a voice from inside the house. "Toad! Toad!" cried Frog. "The sun is shining! The snow is melting! Wake up!" "I am not here," said the voice. Frog walked into the house. It was dark. All the shutters were closed. "Toad, where are you?" called Frog. "Go away," said the voice from a corner in the room. Toad was lying in bed. He had pulled all the covers over his head. Frog pushed Toad out of bed. He pushed him out of the house and onto the front porch. Toad blinked in the bright sun. "Help!" said Toad. "I cannot see anything." "Don't be silly," said Frog. "What you see is the clear, warm light of April, and it means that we can begin a whole new year together, Toad. Think of it," said Frog. "We will skip through the meadows and run through the woods and swim in the river. In the evenings we will sit right here on this porch and count the stars." "You can count them, Frog," said Toad. "I will be too tired. I'm going back to bed." Toad went back into the house. He got into the bed and pulled the covers over his head again. "But Toad," cried Frog, "you will miss all the fun." "Listen, Frog," said Toad. "How long have I been asleep?" "You have been asleep since November," said Frog. "Well then," said Toad, "a little more sleep will not hurt me. Come back again and wake me up about 1/2 May. Good night, Frog." "But Toad," said Frog, "I'll be lonely until then." Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. Frog looked at Toad's calendar. The November page was still on top. Frog tore off the November page. He tore off the December page, and the January page, the February page, and the March page. He came to the April page. Frog tore off the April page too. Then Frog ran back to Toad's bed. "Toad, Toad, wake up! It is May now." "What?" said Toad. "Can it be May so soon?" "Yes," said Frog. "Look at your calendar." Toad looked at the calendar. The May page was on top. "Why, it is May," said Toad as he climbed out of bed. Then he and Frog ran outside to see how the world was looking in the spring. Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last they went back home to Toad's house. "Oh, drat," said Toad. "Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of my buttons on my jacket." "Don't worry," said Frog. "We will go back to all the places where we walked. We will soon find your button." They walked back to the large meadow. They began to look for the button in the tall grass. "Here is your button," cried Frog. "That's not my button," said Toad. "That button is black. My button was white." Toad put the black button in his pocket. A sparrow flew down. "Excuse me," said the sparrow. "Did you lose a button? I found one." "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button has 2 holes. My button had 4 holes." Toad put the button with 2 holes in his pocket. They went back to the woods and looked on the dark paths. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," cried Toad. "That button is small. My button was big." Toad put the small button in his pocket. A raccoon came up from behind a tree. "I heard that you were looking for a button," he said. "Here is one that I just found." "That is not my button," wailed Toad. "That button is square. My button was round." Toad put the square button in his pocket. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," shouted Toad. "That button is thin. My button was thick." Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons and not one of them is mine." Toad ran home and slammed the door. There on the floor he saw his white, 4-holed, big, round, thick button. Oh, said Toad, it was here all the time? What a lot of trouble I have made for Frog. Toad took all the buttons out of his pocket. He took a sewing box down from the shelf. Toad sewed the buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought that it was beautiful. He put it on and jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them on very well.